Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to the FPL Script. This is episode 22, season 3. We're looking at our blind Gameweek29 preview after a pretty poor Gameweek28 from myself and my co-host JD. JD, you had a better week than myself, so why don't you go first and sort of recap that week?
Hi everyone. I did not expect this because I thought we had the same score, but maybe not. Um, yeah, just extremely bad with the Cole Palmer situation. He had the runs, but apparently he wanted to run on the pitch, so we couldn't even get a vice captaincy auto sub, I guess. And I think Joao Pedro is probably and Bruno, of course. Joao Pedro and Bruno Fernandes. I already posted. They've gotten 29 points each in the last 3 game weeks, so that's good. But I think Joao Pedro's points are probably a little, not probably, they are most certainly undeserved, because I think there are a lot of people that persisted with him for a long time and then finally sold him because they had a lot more free transfers than I did. So maybe rewarded for poor play, but I'll take it after being punished for not bad play, in my opinion, all season. So other than that, yeah, I mean, it's been so bad, honestly. Even the Flecken goal, the Watkins goal that Flecken conceded, my God, that's so bad. Like through his legs, it's just, it's that type of season. What about you?
Yeah, well, I don't have Bruno, mostly because I sold him for Trossard, and it's been enjoyable getting 95 minutes a game from Trossard, and practically nothing since that assist versus can't even remember. It's probably
Leicester? Yeah,
yeah, it was Leicester
he
actually. Yeah,
assisted one of Merino's goals and
yeah, yeah, he did.
Nwaneri
It
the
was the
other.
second
Yeah,
goal. Yeah, and
yeah.
since then it's been I think Bruno just going nuclear pretty much every week, whilst I've had the money in the bank for no reason, and yeah, just dross really, especially with the Palmer captaincy. Another pretty brutal swing, I think, in terms of kind of like going against the
Hmm.
dominant captain. Um,
Oh,
and
sorry. Let's talk about the penalty as well, right? Because like that's the biggest news,
the
and I
Palmer
forgot about
captaincy,
that.
or the yeah.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, what is there to say about the penalty?
I mean it's like 12 out of 13 now,
Yeah,
and we also saw Vinicius going from 7 out of 7 to 7 out of 8 in the Champions League.
yeah,
So
with
yeah,
a
maybe
much
there
worse
is
miss as
some.
well, to be fair. But I
Who?
guess larger stakes. Vinicius's miss was much worse. Um,
Fair. That's a good point. Yeah.
yeah, but I thought Vinicius had actually missed some kind of like international penalties. I can't remember.
Oh no, I meant for Real Madrid. So
Oh right, okay,
he
yeah,
had 7 out of 7, I think, and then he missed one.
that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
because he's been pretty good for us, to be honest, as a penalty taker. So that was a surprise. The Palmer one is obviously, I think it was a good save, but also just yeah, unless you're basically going top left, top right, it can be saved, right, if the keeper's
Yeah.
fast enough.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
obviously part of it's
Absolutely.
like reflexes, part of it's actually just preempting. So went pretty poorly, I think, as ever. I was walking around town in middle London, um, flicked through Thought Mob, and I saw Palmer penalty and just saw the miss, and I just yeah, unspeakably bad weekend. But let's just move on to better things. Um, so for this week, I think we wanted to do a quick recap of some of the interesting MB versus MO tidbits, especially for a week where a lot of people are looking at very similar transfers, just given that we've got all these blankers from big teams and you've got a small pool of players that you can really tap into. And I don't think too much of us are on the free hit, but the free hit also is almost a little bit self-prescribed. You can kind of choose what you want, and a lot of the options I think are super close in the defensive positions, but then actually the midfielders, the forwards are you can kind of pick them yourself. But to start things off with, we got Bruno versus Kluivert. Bruno's been pretty hot recently. Couple free kicks, couple set piece assists, and that's gotten him plenty of points as of late. Any thoughts on Bruno yourself? I guess just before we do the comp.
So again, we've been talking about Bruno for 3 episodes straight, and comparing him with Odegaard for 2, and because Odegaard, is just not there, we decided to pick a more competent fantasy option in Kluivert. But anyway, coming back to this, so again, you can see how markets are reacting, right? I mean, I don't think review has budged at all, and this isn't even a case of his penalty share is moving or something like that. He has whatever 99% pen share locked since game week 1. It's just a case of how volatile the market is. And when United was doing extremely badly, when Bruno had not returned for, so he got a red card against Wolves, and then I think he blanked for a couple of game weeks before he got a penalty against Brighton, and then that sort of perhaps stopped the rot, if you can see on this graph, and then it sort of went back up above the zero line, because that's what happens, right, when markets are sort of underrating players and they see that United is such a bad team. It's we're just losing and drawing constantly, that it the odds the massive data just took over, and then now you can see that market odds are again reacting to it. And I just feel like because they are cowards, they don't want to lose a lot of money, and now they're shortening the odds on Bruno returning, and that makes sense because they do believe in hot hand, but it's a fallacy. So I almost said they believe in hot hand fallacy, but that would have been that would have been a paradox. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean Bruno's pretty hot tonight, I guess. If you want to put it that
yeah,
way.
absolutely.
But it's one of those cases where I think functionally, you know, when you're watching stuff on the pitch, like nothing's changed from a few weeks ago when Ahmad was first injured. Or do you think
Yeah,
there's anything that we might have missed?
honestly, so Amorim's statement tonight talking about his number 10s was a little perhaps more revealing, in that he was talking about how his number 10s are supposed to play. And
Mm-hmm.
also, again, this is very anecdotal, but it's very easy to find out. I've seen Bruno run more into the box
Yeah, I've
and
seen that as
run
well.
closer to the box.
Yeah.
I'm glad you agree with me, because again, this is just, we are just corroborating each other's observations, and which is fair.
I think this
And
is also, it kind of coincides with when a lot of people sold him, right? Because like the reality was
it
like
does.
it actually felt like he was not allowed to venture into the box, like in so
Exactly.
many game
Exactly.
states.
Yes, yes. And the one game where he actually was a 10, we played so badly against Ipswich that he had
Yeah.
to come back. And so I think, again, maybe I read too much into it, but I genuinely thought that was the death of him ever playing as the number 10s. And technically it is, right? Because he's still not playing as a 10. He's playing in the deeper role. But the way we are playing with Dorgu now, completely like running ahead into the channel, which is what was expected, right? And finally we are seeing that.
Yeah.
So I think that's just enabling Casemiro to stay by himself,
Mm-hmm.
and then Bruno can run forward. I think Zergzi is sort of that guy now. Even today's game, he was very good on the ball, off the ball. So maybe there's more of a utilization of him trying to cover some of the spaces that Bruno leaves. So I
Yeah.
think people who are better tactically better aware than me can explain this, but I just see that maybe his minute share across number 10 and number 8 probably changes a little bit based on that.
That's a good sign. But I think,
Yeah.
I guess, even given that so many of us are making short-term decisions, the only thing is Dorgu is suspended until 30,
Correct.
right? So
Yeah. 30. Yeah.
not great in that he'll be back for a much tougher game, I suppose.
Yes.
But it's still Leicester away, and it's still Bruno, and you've got so many routes towards points, and that's very much still the case with Kluivert, though. He's actually really improved across the season, as someone who I think has pretty much been liable to being subbed, rotated here and there with this Bournemouth team. So his minutes have ticked up a lot. And I don't think really the MD versus MO observation is that important for people to look at, because frankly, it's very close and it just shows you how good he is as a pick. But I think what's been scary as of late is he's transformed from that sort of 75-minute per game player, even as a ceiling, to now literally dropping 90s, right? And I find that really impressive, especially since a lot of the potential threats have come back into the team. And I think this always happens in football, where we tend to try look at historical minutes too much and overread. And simply put, he's been a key player for them. And I think like that player of the month thing isn't really a joke. If a manager sees someone is basically winning games by himself, scoring crucial goals, assisting crucial goals, inevitably there's going to be a knock-on impact on their minutes, and I think we're starting to see that, in my opinion, with Kluivert. And I can probably put my hands up and say I kind of missed the boat on that whilst it was happening, but we also, you know, hope that there's a bunch of other picks in the game that we hope can sort of pick up good minutes, compete with him well. And I think at one point Dango was close, and then Evanilson came back a lot sooner than expected. Semenyo has been, Semenyo's the interesting one, right? Because I think I remember when we were looking at these comps, Semenyo was the one where I think markets underrate him a lot, maybe fairly. But even still, I think his EV, there's a huge gap now between him and Kluivert if you think Kluivert plays reasonably solid minutes. So yeah, I think the case with him is just that it's been quite impressive, and I think his underlying data has ticked up a little bit as well. But we tend to think that these kind of things can fluctuate a lot, especially since he's increased his minutes output. And I think generally speaking, Bournemouth have played better and better as the season have gone on from an attacking point of view, and models have reacted to that as well from a team strength point of view.
No, and another thing, like you pointed out, which is it's very even keeled, right? It's not as if it's one way for review, another way for odds. And again, you can see the value of review in a graph like this, where review clearly picked up, or rather than picking up, review never was as down on Kluivert as markets were, because review sort of believes in, underlines are going to come good, with team strength, opposition strength, whatever it is. And so as soon as the hot streak started, you started seeing an equalization between market and massive data. And that sort of stuck from that point till Gameweek 29, which is good to see in a way, because that just means whatever model you want to use, he's a good pick. And like Fran said, I made the mistake of, so it's easy to call it a mistake, but yeah, I'm willing to call it a mistake, where I just thought his minutes would naturally go down to a point where he becomes untenable.
Yeah.
And that just hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And like Fran said, I always am a believer, even though I don't believe in form, I believe that managers believe in form. And so that's always the key. So minutes with these players are going to be different than what we expect. And that's happened with Kluivert. I think with Semenyo, he's a victim of the way FPL bonus points are scored, I think. And also because like he keeps picking up yellow cards, which is not great at all for scoring. And so it gives the appearance of him being a worse player, FPL asset, than he actually is, perhaps.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean,
a Darwin Nunez-y type season. That makes sense. Are you talking about like lots of shots on target, like quite a few BCMs?
Yeah, that's a really good comparison. And taking the odd penalty, like Nunez did when Salah wasn't on the pitch. So yeah, but I mean, Kluivert's the penalty taker. I don't know why you would go for anyone else now at this point.
Yeah. Cool. And to be fair, if you were actually to, I mean, this is a good discussion. If you were to pick for someone, and honestly, I don't think price matters at this point, right? These are very close players. Who would you pick if you needed this player for 29 and 30?
So I still think Kluivert, because of the Ipswich game. And what that does is, let's say there's like this very unlikely scenario, which Ben Krellin talked about today, which is Aston Villa winning against Preston and Spurs winning against Eintracht Frankfurt, and then the Gameweek 37 game between Spurs and Villa, I think, needing to be moved into Gameweek 36.
Yeah.
And so that would perhaps present other alternatives in terms of chip strategy. So if you want to still keep your options open, why would you not invest in the cheaper asset? That just makes sense. Because that way, even if let's say you want to sell Salah this week, like Fran and I are doing, I just think it becomes a lot more viable to bring him back, even if it's like in Gameweek 31 or even in 30, because I think Everton at home for Salah is like a great game. But Fulham away is like, I mean, to be honest, there's talking about fixtures now is just seems stupid at this point. The EV is always going to be there for Salah. So yeah, it's just about the team value you lose, right? And I think when we come to I don't know, questions in the chat or just talking in general about what the chip strategy is for both of us, we can probably discuss what your thoughts are on team value, because I'm so poor that it probably doesn't matter too much. But I think you're going to have to make some decisions that are going to impact your team value.
Yeah, I think I'll be selling around 1 million worth of team value this week if I make the moves that I plan to make. But then I also ran like genuinely, I don't know, like maybe even dozens of different binary solves. And I really think that my sort of best bench boost, whether it's a 32 bench boost or a 33 bench boost, just was for the most part very similar. And I don't really care at this point. I'm willing to kind of chase that short-term upside of what it means to sell Salah and Isak. And part of this too has just been the resurgence of the João Pedro minutes in my own estimations. And in the short term, really,
same.
like I feel like there's such a good guarantee there that it's made it even easier for me to justify selling Isak. Whereas previously, of course, I was actually angling just selling João Pedro to Haaland on a week like this. And now it's firmly the case where Dango's kind of an irrelevant pick for my team. Could maybe crop up on 30, depending on, let's say, what the FA Cup minutes outputs really are for the Bournemouth players and how that game goes versus City. But yeah, Dango is someone that I'll just hold on to the bench, whereas João Pedro, I would actually expect him to maybe play both 29 and 30 with really good minutes, and more so because the international break coincides perfectly with the FA Cup game, and he should maybe just come off the bench for that. I don't see many managers, like, yes, of course, we've seen managers before treat fatigue differently in the sense that, okay, someone's fatigued, you suddenly maybe play him, you eventually like rest him, let's say, I don't know, a month after he has this international break or something like that. I think that happened to Mitoma one time, right? But because I think the most grueling aspect of that sort of South American international break is literally
the traveling,
the
right?
turnaround time. I just can't really see João Pedro starting that FA Cup game.
No, it makes no sense because
Yeah.
Welbeck is right there.
Yeah.
He's not going anywhere. He's going to be there. So you're right. It makes no sense for Pedro to start that game.
Yeah, plus Rutter, same case with him. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts, and that's that. Next one is going to be Evanilson and Wood, and I think what's interesting about Evanilson is I think he's probably he actually outright has better odds to score than Wood this week, right?
Yes.
But I think a lot of people are going to go with Wood for reasons, and the reasons are mostly effective ownership related and kind of approach to risk, I suppose, related. But Evanilson just looks really impressive, and it's kind of funny looking at their graphs. But I feel like part of the kind of trend that we tend to see with teams like maybe a Bournemouth and a Nottingham Forest this season is that these are both teams that have improved a lot over the course of the season. And I think when team strengths shift in a certain way, particularly obviously in attack here, which is relevant for these two players, then suddenly you also see like different approaches to how that changes from an MD versus MO perspective. And I kind of feel like over the course of the season, we've gradually still improved our expectations on Nottingham Forest offense week on week, and the same thing with Bournemouth. And I kind of think that the graphs still in some way sort of reflect that. Any thoughts on Evanilson and Wood?
Yeah, with Evanilson, you can, of course, clearly ignore the weeks he was injured because that's just a flat line.
Yeah.
But other than that, again, like you said, it clearly shows that after a certain point in time this season, a Bournemouth attack is probably equally rated on both review and odds, which makes it so much easier just to, if you want to like mentally have them at a certain place within the tier system, it's very easy to place them. And it's be it XG, be it actual goals, they've just been good. So I don't. I mean, I'm not knocking this pick at all. My only concern is the minutes this week. But I mean, 70 minutes is still 75 minutes is still fine. So
yeah, I think
that's not going to be.
Evanilson's impressive because for someone who actually doesn't play very, I mean, he's very much like Raul, right? Like,
yeah,
but better actually. Like I think the starts are always guaranteed. It feels like with him, and maybe the only time that will kind of be impacted, given Bournemouth is only invested into one cup, is that FA Cup swing. But he's not in the Brazil national team either, so because he's also like a 7 to 8 minute sub, it kind of allows him to start every single game every 3 days. So that's been nice. And I think Wood's minutes over the course of the season have actually improved as well. Like I feel like now he's seeing games out, and Awani is getting very, very sparse minutes. Like
No, it's also because like every time Awani starts, for example, in the FA Cup,
yeah,
he's been so bad that Chris Wood has had to be brought on like around 75 to 80 minutes. And then in the last game that went to extra time, Chris Wood had to play almost setting 45 minutes or something like that. So it's getting to a point where you can't deduct any meaningful minutes off of Chris Wood to account for someone like Awani. It's just going to be a case of the game's won by like 4 or 5 goals. And assuming Chris Wood, to be fair, Chris Wood being on a hat trick has never been a factor, but because I think Nuno has already brought him off when he's been on a brace like several times this season. So I don't think that's a factor. But just, the team being dominant is a huge factor. So that's the only thing that could potentially sub him off early. And if that happens, I mean, that you know what has happened already. So there's no point discussing that. Though the only interesting thing I found is the constant up and downs that you're seeing in market versus MD.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that has to do with the minutes to some extent. I don't know if markets are thinking that Chris Wood is potentially going to play less minutes, because what happens is when the review is scaling minutes for players, you enter the input and then that scales the EV. But when you get odds from markets, you never know what minutes markets has him at.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's just an implication that he starts, but not necessarily what. Yeah.
How many minutes he plays. So that will never be known to us, and because it's never known to us, this very hard to gauge that impact. But I think stuff like this can help us understand the impact perhaps, because we know that review is a very stable model that does not react to 1 or 2 game weeks or even 10 game weeks worth of hot streak. It's very stable and it trusts long-term data much more. So there's some conclusions to be made, but let's see if this pans out. If we see more fluctuations, I'd be more certain of the fact that market thinks Wood has some dicey minutes, I think.
Isn't it? I think it's also maybe like how hard it is to kind of transcribe that like imputation of market minutes, as you were saying, because it kind of reminds me of when we have these discussions of, let's say Isak literally gets a hat trick in 60 minutes, they're up 5-0 versus Leicester, and he gets taken off at 65 minutes. It kind of reminds me of how tricky it is when we go back and discuss situations like that, and like when we evaluate, for example, someone's MD that week and we look at, let's say, his mins, like clearly he's performed poorly, but then I think that the thing that we and the markets know is that the implication of minutes are always that they're safe up until a point, right? Let's say up until Nottingham Forest is 2-0 up with 5 minutes to go, and things like that. And I think that's kind of like how I would, like, those are really what Wood's minutes are, as opposed to, okay, he's playing 80 or 85 or 87. It's really until like Wood can be safely rested. And I think it's probably that translation makes it quite tough. And then obviously I think there's been like, he's had a couple big purple patches over the course of the season as well. So I'm sure there's been some radical swings, maybe partially due to that as well.
Yeah, but you can see that unlike some other players that we've seen over the season, you don't see like a proper spike downwards after the initial spike around, what is it, game week 9. So once that spike has sort of corrected, you don't see that sort of an overreaction from markets, which just makes me feel like because of his age, I don't think they are. I think they still feel like there's some margin to be had, and you can lure even more bettors into betting on anytime goal scorers. But I think they've lost a sizable amount of money this season because they've been doing that.
Yeah, I remember like when I was, because I maybe like every 7 game weeks do my own videos just looking at like overperformance, and I remember at one point he was like 5th or 7th in the list of all Premier League players, and he was only like plus 3.8 for the season. And now when I last checked, I think he's like plus 6, and he's leading the league now.
Oh,
So yeah, like it's in a way he's just been super impressive this season, and it's crazy looking at his historicals as well, like that he's just about average as a finisher. But hey, we've been subjected to Chris Wood this season. So next one's going to be defenders, and we actually have two pairs of defenders. It's Aina and Guardiola, and the reason why I used Aina is just a bit of a hopefully a case study for Nottingham Forest defense, which I'm sure us within the analytics field will have much less ownership of, and have generally had much less ownership of over the course of the season. But yeah, I wanted to look into someone like Aina. Maybe Aina's not a great one because he's a player who doesn't have much underlying data, and I feel like maybe his route towards points is actually bonus, like in much the same way that Saliba gets bonus, right? Like he's kind of like pass metrics and things like that. But Aina seems to be review favored. Is that kind of a shock to you?
and maybe it would make sense because Forest have a lot of tough fixtures to come,
Yeah,
and that is actually a good time to check what markets have them at in terms of a defense compared to a review.
yeah,
And maybe Milenkovic is a better
yeah.
player to look at for that because to be honest, not
Set
even Milinkovic
pieces.
because he's had so many goals this season that perhaps he is not the right guy. So
Neat.
maybe Murillo is the right guy
Yeah.
because that's or Nico Williams, but Nico Williams is not guaranteed to play every single game. So maybe it's worth looking at Murillo next
Do you
episode.
actually think so?
But
I think Nico Williams is safe.
no, he is safe. Okay, out of those four, who
Yeah.
would you expect to have the least security? That's all I meant.
Yeah, fine, that's fair.
Yeah,
I'll agree
but
with that.
all of them are secure. Just to be clear.
Yeah.
Thanks, man, because I don't want people to misinterpret what I said.
No, that's
So
right.
I just think him being review favored is also perhaps because he has. I think does he have throw-ins from one side?
He definitely does.
Like because I think that they put all their long throws into the box. I think so. Maybe there's some weightage to that as a set piece. I don't know, man. It's going to be very minuscule.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just trying to think of what possible reasons could there be for him to be so heavily favored by review.
Yeah.
Another thing that could potentially be is he has better goals and assist projections, but that we can easily look at, right? If we look at, can we quickly do this? I don't want to take up too much time because we've spent a lot of time talking about Chris Wood already. Okay, so he has like, I doubt it. He has like 0.3 projected goals and 0.9 projected assists for the next 10 weeks.
Yeah, no, I think generally speaking, actually, reviews just hotter
Yeah.
on Nottingham Forest defense. I've just sorted kind of the slider by looking at Nottingham Forest defenders.
Oh,
I can see
yeah.
across the board.
Mm.
But
Mm-hmm.
that's very interesting, right? Because I think it goes back to these kind of cases where we talk about how fast something adjusts, and it seems like now we're at a point where models are actually hotter on Nottingham Forest as a defense than markets are, and maybe that's also partially because Nottingham Forest have lost a couple of clean sheets recently, things like that, right? And I don't know how things are sort of yo-yoing back and forth, but like seasonally, both Fulham and Nottingham Forest I think have probably been like the biggest improvers generally speaking on defense as a team. So yeah, good to see that they're kind of maintaining that strength. Do you have any interest in Nottingham Forest players? Like, are you making moves for any of them?
Not really, because I don't have any spare free transfers, and also their EV is not that great for the next like 4 or 5 game weeks, I think.
Yeah.
So if I were to bring someone in, I think I would bring in the guy you have right next to him or down below him, I guess.
Yeah. Any thoughts on Guardiola and that? That's a very up and down chart, I suppose. But I feel like City
I
have
would,
had
yeah,
an up and down season, so
yeah.
could be explained by that. But I think with Guardiola, what I've noticed is I think generally this might be his most productive season, just from an underlying perspective.
Mm.
And I wonder if there's been a bit of an adjustment to that from maybe let's say the review side potentially.
Mm.
Because I mean he was hot at the end of last season, so I can't imagine that markets would have underestimated what he could do. But then it's nice to see that he's kind of had a very consistent season now of really good XG for 90 and even relatively solid XA as a fullback. So I'm sure it's like that, because I remember even at the start of the season when I was looking at Rico Lewis, like, and we were so uncertain like what he could be like, right? Someone who could be like honestly in the pockets, sometimes it would be in the box taking shots to where he's like now in no man's land. But Guardiola's been someone who I remember at one point was like had worse EV per 90 than Rico. But he's been very stable, I think, in sort of maintaining his level of production.
But do you also think that this is caused by review never giving up on City's defensive baseline?
I think so. That's part of it too.
Yeah, because this graph is very indicative of that, given that Guardiola has rarely fallen below the 0 line, which just means that reviews keeps thinking.
I feel like
to be fair,
City has always, Review has always been high on City defense over markets. I
yeah,
remember that. Even
absolutely.
before this season's collapse, like it's always been the case.
No. So the only reason I'm trying to maybe not justify it, but trying to think of it like that is because my model, the Champions League model, I have also had the same issue.
Okay.
In that City was still the best defense till the end of group stages.
Oh, okay.
And so because it takes time, right? You need a lot of data to overwrite like 5 seasons.
You're telling me it wasn't a mistake when I sold Gyökeres before his hat trick versus City?
It's never a mistake to sell a player before they play Man City, honestly. But yeah, there is. And sorry, before we move on, just looked at the data, and Forest are 4th on npxG per 90.
Yeah, they are.
And Fulham is 3rd.
Yeah.
And no wonder most analytics players have one Fulham defender in their team. That makes a lot of sense, actually. No, like Castagna or Anderson. Also because they're dirt cheap. So there's that as well.
No, but
City, City are 10th. That's crazy.
Yeah. That's really impressive, actually, how much their defense has fallen off.
Yeah.
City are still respectable in attack as well. But yeah, I think Fulham and Nottingham Forest have definitely made the biggest leaps and margins in terms of changes in terms of defense. And yeah, good time to shout out Elevenify. Like, if you have a look at his team ratings, if you're subscribed to his site, you can kind of see week to week how his models reacted to changes in defense and attack. And really impressive to see where Fulham's at. And but we're still much worse than Bournemouth, sadly. So as part of the podcast narrative, it's still not looking great for me. Hello, I'm on personal hotspot, so let's see how long this lasts. It might not be great in terms of streaming a large file, but let's try and
Wait, how did both of us have the same issue?
Well, my internet is cooked, so I'm on personal hotspot. So
yeah, same. My internet got cooked, so I'm on personal hotspot right now.
Okay, well, let's try and pack this show up before I get a big data bill. But Ait-Nouri and Kerkez, they're kind of inverse, right? So
yeah.
Maybe I think part of it with Ait-Nouri is always just the attacking element of his game. I think has been super hard to model.
Yes.
And then with Kerkez, I think generally speaking, we have the confidence levels to say that they're just an amazing team. And I think Kerkez also, a lot of his actions are quite bonus positive as well, I feel. But I'd love to see maybe a look at someone like Haaland just to compare later down the line. With Ait-Nouri, though, what I've noticed, for example, in the previous match is that Sarabia actually coming in the second half of the previous match actually took a lot of set pieces away from Ait-Nouri because he was like posturing to take a lot of them. So actually in the short term, I think it's actually not so good for people who really wanted to go for that Ryan Ait-Nouri punt. But actually it makes Sarabia a really good short-term punt. So if there's a nugget from this podcast, I suppose if you're free hitting and you've got a big pair of balls and you actually want to impress me, go Sarabia on your free hit. And I hope you get a penalty. But yeah, I don't know. Any kind of additional thoughts on Ryan Ait-Nouri versus Kerkez?
No, not too much on Kerkez, just on Ait-Nouri. I think another important thing is the change in management as well, because under Gary O'Neill, I think he was just roaming free, 5 at the back system, left wing back. So at that time, because I owned him for large parts of that, I just felt there was some justification, because reviews assessment of Ait-Nouri has always been extremely subpar.
Yes, it has
as an FPL asset.
I think I can agree.
So Yeah, and you can see that, right? It's firmly below zero. It's rarely like after game week 3, it's never gone up. So, I mean, yeah, that's all about that. I think there's much better defenders you can buy probably for game week 29.
Yeah, but then again, on a free hit, Ait-Nouri is a really good pick. I just think because so many people are angling for
Yeah, on a free hit, yes.
exactly angling for a transfer on 29 plus 30, someone like Kerkez is still going to be a lot more interesting to me given the Ipswich game coming off of that, and he's suspended for the FA Cup, so huge kind of perk for his minutes. Any maybe additional thoughts in terms of
Is he going away with Hungary? Just like
he probably
side.
Yeah, he probably is.
He must be, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, he's yeah, okay. So yeah, it's in Europe, so there's no problem with that as well.
I think for xMins today, we'll probably kind of, I feel like we're gonna scrap the segment because I just think there's so many impacts that you can't really nail down right now with FA Cup. Like with the Bournemouth players, I think it comes down to the minutes that they play in the FA Cup, whether people go extra time. Quite similar to City. I think City is actually the most open it's been in terms of the attackers. I just feel like things just aren't gelling really well for City. And I don't think like any player from Foden to KDB to Marmoush is really doing it or cutting it for Pep right now. And even the wingers, to be honest, like Savio's actually had great underlines this season, but it's hard to justify that he's a good pick for the short term as well, because he just had a really poor game, and Bob is in training as well, right? So things like that, I don't know, aren't great. Bit of a murky landscape, but I think the transfers that we just went through, the players that we went through, like those are all solid picks that you can't really go wrong picking them, and that's where we're at. So yeah, shout out to Sam as well, who had Kluivert this whole time. Captaincy.
Oh,
sorry.
I was before both of us lost our internets. The question I was going to ask you was,
oh right, yeah,
you're Mr. Guardiola, right? So why are you not going Guardiola?
I am going Guardiola, so
just you are? Oh, okay.
I am, yeah.
Okay.
Big Yosko's back.
So
yeah.
Oh my god, it's gonna be a goal. I can just feel it.
I need him to save my season, so there absolutely needs to be a finesse like versus Brighton, maybe a clean sheet loss, but then versus Leicester, it just has to be 1 goal and 3 bonus and a clean sheet. That's the only thing that can save my season. So please, Josko.
I'm probably going to buy him for that game against Leicester because Trent is not going to be back, right? Let's be real.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's hope he actually bags a goal.
Right. So for captaincy this week, just to shift gears quickly, it's Haaland, Kluivert, Bruno. Now this is run on like a per 95-minute basis, but this is what I was talking about, where I think Kluivert really has reached that status where his minutes they can't be laughed at. They've actually gotten better and better as people have come back into the team. So there's just nothing you can really say against him. It's a short-term trend. It could probably reverse itself, but I just think he's safe. Any thoughts on, like, I think most people will go Bruno if they had all the money in the world and it didn't really create any problems. But yeah, 30 is the impact. I think you make your own decisions there in terms of Kluivert and Bruno, depending on what your team needs. Is there any case for going against Haaland in general? Because what I've noticed, actually, just looking at some of the market odds, is that I think it's quite a fair bit lower on Haaland. And maybe it would have been nice to actually show MD versus MO on Haaland. But any thoughts on Haaland this season and how he's been ticking along? Because obviously his baselines have dropped a little bit from an npxG perspective. You've been modeling Haaland, though, of course, for a different game. Any thoughts on Haaland?
The drop, I think, is more for the team strength than I think Haaland personally, because even when he was running at, I don't know, 0.95 npxG or something like that, ridiculous last season, I think you had to account for the npxG in itself being part of the hot streak to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And I think that's come true this season, even though it's actually gone to the other end of the spectrum, where I don't think he's necessarily getting as many chances as he would in a regular City season.
Yeah.
So the question you asked is, can you repeat the question you asked? Because I think we can swap Haaland for Salah. And I think we should have asked ourselves that question last week. Is there any point in not going for? You said, is there any point not going for Haaland, right, or something like that? So
yeah.
yeah. So I think maybe Bruno. I would probably look at Bruno, but this hat trick changes nothing. I think United are still the best. The best thing I've read recently about United is whatever the opposition is, we managed to make it a close game. Whatever it is, like it could be Leicester, it could be Ipswich, it could be Barcelona right now, or Real Madrid. Everyone is treated equally. So I don't expect us to absolutely like run through Leicester, but again, if you want to chase differential EV, then Bruno's your guy. But I think I'll go Haaland because I'm buying him, and I think it makes sense to captain him for 2 game weeks. So it's just too good of a punt for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think, look, we like to talk about risk, and clearly a lot of people seem to think that outcomes are related to risk, but it's just it's plus EV, it's plus risk, right? And
yes.
what could possibly go wrong in a season like this when we have this? Yeah. Any maybe let's just quickly jump through Q&A. The one thing I actually wanted to speak on in terms of a chip strategy perspective before we actually jump into the chat, though, but I just thought it'd be a good way to go through it in this segment, is just any thoughts on Wildcard 29 from your perspective. I know we're not considering it, you and me, necessarily, but just I guess the merit towards Wildcard 29 and your thoughts on it.
Okay, so before we discuss merits, I think quickly just a rundown of why people are not wildcarding. Like for example, you and I. So lack of information, right? We still don't know what the FA Cup fixtures will be, the actual FA Cup fixtures that will lead to postponements or rescheduling later down the line. So that's, I think, the biggest driver for both of us. And also, I don't want to wildcard before an international break. That just seems like a recipe for disaster for any potential injuries. So again, all of these things are wildly overrated. Most people come back from the international break fit and they keep playing. But again, everyone has their own anecdotal evidence of how they were screwed over by the international break. I still remember Ozan Kabak, the loanee they got from Schalke, Liverpool. He went away and he was never allowed to enter the country after that point because of some visa issues. And the same thing happened to DeAndre Edlin for Newcastle when he went away with his team. So I have had 2 players across multiple seasons being deported from the United Kingdom, which is, I think, has to be some sort of record. And again, that doesn't drive my decision making, but I just feel like those are the things that will probably dissuade me. But again, talking about advantages, I think let's talk FPL. Andy has been posting a lot about Wildcard 29. It's more to do with if you have a ton of injuries.
Yeah, I think you have to have a really bad team for prospectively gaming 29.
Yes. Yeah. That's I think the crux of it.
It kind of reminds me of my wildcard last season, to be honest. Like the idea that you wildcard into a blank, that you kind of make a couple shouts in terms of what the FA Cup outcomes could be, predict ahead. But I think to probably give more credit to people who are wildcarding this season, I think you're carrying more free transfers than I did on my wildcard, and I think it's a much better wildcard. So it's interesting for those people within that very specific spot where I think it kind of helps them the most. I still don't like it from a perspective of, you kind of have to build these transfers back up for the Newcastle and Crystal Palace players. And then your bench boost setup is probably going to be a little bit weaker than most. But hey, it's like some people are contemplating -4s, -8s, -12s this week. If you can kind of get rid of that, I think there's more than enough justification in a season like this where I think chips are not so relevant outside of the assistant manager chip in terms of like producing EV and probably changing outcomes drastically from a kind of EV point of view. Then I think it's totally fine. I think it's actually quite an interesting strategy for people.
Yeah.
And you also have that security of the City's double being effectively real. Like, that's quite nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Holland. So even if you want to like triple captain Holland, or if you want to free hit him in, or if you want to have him from 29, that's something that you can probably decide right now. You don't need to wait till game week 33 to make that decision. So you're right. There are some lack of disadvantages, is what I would say. I still don't think there's a distinct advantage. I just think there are fewer disadvantages. Like you said, it's about if your team like needs to have like minus 12, minus 16, then yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just jump into a couple chat questions. First of all, David Duke, why am I streaming so late? Well, I mean, first of all, I guess you're based in the States. I'm just a nocturnal animal, I guess.
You're just alive 24 hours.
Reed's asking the question of which pair would we choose on wildcard 31, Semenyo plus Agbado or Hudson-Odoi plus Ait-Nouri? I think I'd still pick Semenyo plus Agbado.
Oh yeah.
Any thoughts? Do you have any thoughts in terms of the Nottingham Forest wingers? They actually have really poor data, but they seem like perennial overperformers. I don't know. I can't say from a modeling perspective there's much love for these players. Sure, Hudson-Odoi looks like a positive finisher, but I don't think it's particularly close to someone like Semenyo who's posting such strong numbers. And that's it.
And also the fixtures, right? I mean, this fixture is fine. So either way, you get one Ipswich fixture, but
true.
I think it's the underlying factor, right? Team strength. Yeah.
Well, I think Rob T actually shared some thoughts in terms of home and away. I think specifically within the Premier League, right, where home and away hasn't been so relevant for this season. You've been obviously looking into
it's a 12-year low. It's a 12-year low.
It's a 12-year low. Wow, that's incredible. Specifically for the Premier League, right, or across Europe. Yeah.
It's only Premier League because I looked at Champions League and it's absolutely not true. Champions League is the home and away advantage. The home advantage versus away is as good as it ever was.
Yeah. Can I say I felt it last night when I was watching us play in the same city, but in a different stadium. One of the Metropolitano. But yeah. Yeah. I mean, even let's say Arsenal's historic away goal scoring kind of performance was backed by some really piss poor XG. So can't even justify on that ground. But Are
we talking about that West Ham 7-0?
No,
because that's I think one of the biggest contributors of that.
No, I just meant like UCL, PSV, Arsenal. That been away, Jay says, I'll probably do Trent, Salah, Watkins, to Guardiola, Kluivert, Haaland. I think those are class moves. In fact, you're bringing in the same 3 players that I have, so they must be good because they need to be. Adam,
and if I'm being honest, Review launched a new feature where you can run all your chip strategy in one go on the linear optimizer.
Yeah.
And what that does is it automatically takes into account value lost between selling and buying players.
Beautiful.
So I'm sure Fran has used that as well because he is looking.
I have indeed. Yeah.
Into selling all these players absolutely. And so if you use that for my team, you get these exact 3 players as well to buy. Even for a -4. I only have 2 free transfers.
Well, I'll see you there,
get these exact same moves.
Am I seeing you there?
No. I just don't feel like taking a -4, but I'll be doing 2 out of 3. So
fine, fair. Not everyone loves hits as much as I do. Adam TS says, Fran, you sold Salah, Isak. I'm planning to sell both, to be quite honest. Salas mentioning, who would you prioritize if you could transfer one of them, Bruno or Haaland? I think I'd still prioritize Haaland, especially if you care about Game Week 30. If you don't, then probably just Bruno.
Yes.
And then the question of, will Chris Wood be the most captain player this week? I don't think so. Do you think Chris Wood will be? Maybe he will, actually. I think most captains no, but maybe highest effective ownership, yes.
No.
No? You don't think so at all?
Correct. That's a better
Okay.
way of putting
Yeah.
it. That's
Yeah.
that's the way I would have put it. Yeah, because Holland is still owned by so many million teams that overall I still think. Oh, okay. Even if you talk about like
Right.
relevant rank tiers,
Yeah. I think
I'm still saying that it's going to be the case where Holland will be captain more, but Chris Wood will have more ownership. Yeah,
yeah, I think that's
perfect.
exactly it. Because there's still a segment
Yeah.
of the crowd that will go with Bruno cap, Kluivert cap, and kind of ignore
Yes.
Haaland for I think justifiable reasons. If you really care about team value, things like that, and or if you're wildcarding on 30, for example.
Yes.
Kearney, yeah, thank you for actually staying up as well to support your own
Same.
sleeping habits. Salah's mentioned that he's done a -4 this week of Palmer / Mateta out for Gibbs White and Haaland, who will be his captain for the next 2 weeks. Yeah, that's fair. Gibbs White's an interesting one, actually. I mean, he's actually had a pretty good open play season, right? We are perennial Gibbs White haters on the podcast, but
Yes,
I've got to say, like, he's had a pretty good season so far, I feel.
he has, and I think it sort of balances out last season where he had fake penalty share for the entire season.
Yeah.
So I think it's richly deserved that he has poor EV this season compared to last. I mean,
but
I think it's still decent.
Yeah,
like you mentioned the wingers, right? I would buy Morgan Gibbs White 10 times before I bought either
I'm with you there.
or Elanga. Yeah,
because I feel like with Elanga and Hudson-Odoi, they're so prone to having a bad game and being the sub early. Whereas Gibbs White had still...
Also, Elanga was sacrificed, right? He played out of position 3 at the back system where he was playing wing back, I think. So they sacrificed his against City. So it's not going to happen every week, but it did happen against City because I think they wanted to pack the midfield. So that just shows you that these guys are moldable, but at the same time, their EV is even less reliable than it usually should be.
True. All right, I think that's it for us in the show. Apologies in advance to my wife who does pay the phone bill or my phone bill, but yeah, show must go on. Any kind of closing thoughts, JD?
No, just apologize to Mrs. Morales Wu, and hopefully the bill won't be too big. So there's that.
All right, great. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll catch you guys soon, and hopefully you guys have a lovely blind Gameweek 29, and maybe we can come back the next episode with some green arrows for once. Hopefully that's the dream, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Take care, guys.
All right.
Bye.